For those who don't know me, I'm Greg Poling. I direct the Southeast Asia program and the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative here at CSIS. And if you're confused what you walked into, this is the 14th annual CSIS South China Sea Conference. And we are incredibly proud that it is still going 14 years in. I suspect we weren't entirely sure that the South China Sea would still be such a big issue 14 years ago when we launched it, or more accurately, when Murray Hebert over there and Ernie Bauer helped launch it back when I was still an intern. Everything today that you're going to hear is, of course, on the record. It's being streamed live. We have a larger audience online who are encouraged to take part, ask questions. All the videos, keynotes, and panels will be up online. We'll also have transcripts up for if you miss anything from either the Congressman's keynote or the keynote at lunch. I also, at the top, want to thank our supporters. So the conference is made possible with the support of the Foundation for East Sea Studies of Vietnam, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK, and the embassies of the Philippines, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. So thank you all very much. For most of you, thank you for continuing to support this for more than a decade now. That is more than enough for me. So let me introduce our opening keynote. This morning, we're going to hear from Congressman Darrell Issa, who represents California's 48th District. Congressman Issa is a leading member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, a big proponent of U.S. presence in the Indo-Pacific, and particularly of the U.S.-Philippine alliance. Perhaps no surprise, given that you represent much of San Diego County, and the Filipino Americans helped build the U.S. Navy and towns like San Diego. Congressman Issa recently secured unanimous support for his amendment to H.R. 8036, the Indo-Pacific Security Supplemental Appropriations Act, which most of us know because of the billions of dollars it authorized for Taiwan. But courtesy of Congressman Issa's efforts, it also includes $500 million of foreign military financing for the Philippines. Now, without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Congressman Issa to the podium.
It is a great pleasure to be here. And I've always been told, try to know your audience. So I'm going to ask everyone in the audience who has family or close friends and relations in the region we're going to talk about of the South China Sea, including the Philippines, Vietnam, and southern China. I only have friends, but okay. That's less than I would have thought, because the connection of the United States to that region is one of the strongest. And if you, as you said, Greg, if you were in San Diego, it'd be even stronger. 24 years ago, when I entered Congress, we didn't have a Philippine caucus. Coming out of San Diego, I kind of asked why, particularly when we had history of World War II and well before that was so related to that area, and particularly the Philippines. And so I was one of the two. Normally we do these caucuses on a bipartisan basis with another congressman of the other party. We formed the Philippine Caucus. And our first mission was to deal with the Rescission Act, an act that said after World War II, all the promises made by MacArthur, we just renege on. I'm very proud that we succeeded in that, and we got some justice for those who had been made promises, because America keeping its promises in this region is critical. Now, we've made long-term promises. We made them to Japan when they agreed, maybe at gunpoint, but then when they agreed after World War II to remain a non-military entity. We have changed our view over the decades, and recently, as we all know, the administration successfully built for the first time an alliance with Japan, agreeing to put boots on the ground in the Philippines in a cooperative format along with the United States because of a common threat. And I would like to find a diplomatic way to say that the common threat is more general than it is, but it isn't. It's China. And in fact, we are re-entering a Cold War. Now, what makes it kind of interesting is when I got involved in the Philippine caucus, we weren't in a Cold War, just the opposite. I had just left my relatively successful electronics company. where I manufactured in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, and in the new territories in China. It was encouraged. We had favorable trade relations with China.
And U.S. support for the Philippines and U.S. militarization of the West Philippine Sea. U.S. out of the Philippines.
Now, I'm relatively confident that we still have a full room of people who wanted to talk about the future of cooperation in the region for peaceful purposes. I will say that there was a group larger than the one in this room who were paid to come to mine and other district offices on behalf of what you heard earlier. There's no question at all. It is always a little bit confrontational when you're looking at putting forces to, in fact, prevent something. But that's exactly what we're involved in doing. And I'm very proud of the fact that we are in the process of increasing our relationship, which has been in place for the entire time that I've been in Congress. But I will say 24 years ago, when I entered, we had one modern helicopter for the president of the Philippines and 4 very old Vietnam surplus Hueys. And those 4, if 2 ran, that was good. The military and the capability for the Philippines is a defense capability, and I believe it always will be. And our role in the region, along with partners, has to continue to be just that. We have no ambition of expanding our territories or our holdings there. We have no intention of having any more bases than that which we are both asked to fulfill and we find necessary. It's one of the areas that I work on with the Philippines, is that when we left those bases, we left the Philippines in a situation where they went from being very secure to be feeling insecure. We want to bring that security back, but we want to do so without any more boots on the ground than necessary. I didn't come here to talk about a military alliance, though. I came here primarily to talk about the fact that a strong economic relationship needs to be balanced in the region. As I was saying, 24 years ago, my relationship, construction of security products and audio products in the electronics area had shifted from almost exclusively the US to more than 50% Asia, and of that Asia, almost half of it was being done in the new territories. But this was a different time. This was a time in which there had been a peaceful transition from Britain, of Hong Kong, to China. And there was a promise of a gradual change, and one in which they could retain 2 different economic systems under one government. That promise was broken. And as a result, speaking of Taiwan, That promise will be broken again if Taiwan were to be merged officially back into China. So for the time being, the United States has to put a pause on closer relations with China, on turning over more power to China. And by the way, as China supplies our clear adversaries to peace in other regions, such as Iran and Russia, and China continues to be the #1 buyer of clandestine oil and the #1 buyer or seller of the weapons support for both Russia's aggression on Ukraine and the Iranian activities, including the Houthis, and of course, which has just really disrupted trade and cost hundreds of billions of dollars to people around the world because of that disruption, not the least of which also includes loss of life, but also the terrible situation in Gaza. I spend a lot of time in that region, but I know that the reason I'm spending time in that region is because China has made a choice. They've made a choice to side themselves with Iran and Russia. Maybe it's an alliance of people who don't like each other, but it's an alliance nonetheless. Now, I want to save time for questions. So I just want to focus back on the Philippines for a moment. We have a long history with the Philippines. We didn't keep all of our promises, but
you support war crimes.
And I live over by the Chinese Chinese ambassador's residence. So every day, every morning, I get to listen to very much amplified megaphones of people who object to China, who are there every day. And every day I try to remind myself that the disruption of other people's opportunity to express their free views is sometimes thwarted by people who silence them. So every day I close my windows and doors and try not to hear too much of that amplified speech. But at the same time, we are having a lively discussion about the best way not to put the Philippines in harm's way and to keep them out of harm's way. But I'm going to close with this. Whether it's Vietnam, Taiwan, or the Philippines, there is an aggressive activity that the two gentlemen that have left seem to miss. One in which rights of free travel on the open seas, territorial rights of those three organizations, including their fishermen, are being aggressively thwarted by government-backed Chinese vessels every day. So we don't have the luxury of saying do nothing. If we do nothing, we will see a swallowing up, directly and indirectly, of these countries and these territories. And that's why I'm here today, and that's why I truly would enjoy the opportunity to take questions both from Greg and from the audience. So with that, thank you all for being here. By the way, those first two people seem to have had too much coffee, but I never have too much coffee.
I think we've all got the blood pumping this morning. Sure, it'll lead to some good discussion throughout the day. Let me start with the recent amendment that you had passed, the Indo-Pacific Supplemental, a few months ago. Could you talk about why you feel and other members feel it's so important to increase FMF to the Philippines and what that might accomplish?
That's a great question, and obviously this is for the two nations to work out details. But what I envision is the kind of capability that typically militaries don't ask for. I'm not looking at tanks, I'm not looking at fighter aircraft, but I am looking at the question of, will they have the ability to detect incursions into their waters for the Philippines? Will they have the ability to thwart aggressive activity by ships at sea? This may well be small, relatively small craft, we'll call it Coast Guard type craft, and the training and capability. Conclusion to that thought, we're looking at military cooperation and aid, but the Philippines has not been in a position to defend its own waters, including its fishing rights. So we're not looking at boots on the ground, contrary to what you might have heard. We are looking at training. We are looking at defense capability. And hopefully, if my aspirations and Senator Hagerty and others are realized, we will be increasing the ability for the Philippines and throughout the region, people simply to say the rules of international law need to be obeyed, and to get them obeyed, sometimes you need to have your own, and I'll call it Coast Guard, because I believe that's really what a big part of it will be. It may also include drones and other assets that allow for surveillance efficiently, but that's really what it's all about. We're looking for a peaceful resolution to what has been an aggressive act by an expanding and, quite frankly, perhaps probing government of China.
Thank you. Congressman, one more question from me. I know we've eaten up a bit of time, not with questions, so I do want to get to yours.
Too bad some of the people left without asking questions.
I know. Hey, if only they had been able to put you on the spot. So the vast majority of the conversation we see in the media when it comes to the Indo-Pacific is about Taiwan. Do you feel that other members of Congress are aware enough about the South China Sea? Has Taiwan sucked too much of the oxygen out when it comes to our understanding of other potential crises in the region?
That's one of my fears, is that a decade ago, there was an announcement of a pivot to Asia. And that pivot was a nice statement, except without the substance behind it and the training, it really didn't mean a lot. On top of that, that pivot concerned, even before President Trump came in, our NATO allies. Well, at the same time, maybe emboldening Russia to say, oh, they're moving away from us, we can do more. We must do both. We must educate both, and that's one of the, as a senior member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, it's one of my greatest challenges is to have every member of the Foreign Affairs Committee travel at least in a 2-year period, once east, once west, and do so that they can teach the other 435 minus them members of the House, and of course the same in the Senate, because our biggest challenge is exactly that. We look at the shiny object. One good example is most people don't know Vietnam is experiencing many of the same aggressive acts that the Philippines are. And these are two sovereign nations with long histories of challenges with China and other countries. So yes, it's different than the argument of a peaceful transition someday for Taiwan. Well, in fact, forcing, if you will, China to keep the promises it made. That's a separate situation very much for the Chinese people on the island of Formosa versus these other countries whose sovereignty are being directly attacked. So yes, you're exactly right. We have to find a way to educate, and of course every 2 years we have a new crop of members, so it's not a job that ends overnight, but it is one of the areas that I've talked to the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Senate about us doing a better job of becoming the committee that educates its own and then seeks to educate the rest of Congress.
Thank you. All right, let's turn to the audience in the few minutes we have left. We have a stand mic here in the middle of the room if you want to make your way over, and I'll call on you. If you're online, you can also type your questions in. You'll see a prompt box, and we'll be able to see them here in the room. Yes, sir. And please, 2 rules, introduce yourself and make the question a question, please. That'll be the rule throughout the day.
Hey everybody, my name is Reese Bro. I'm with the China program at Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you for speaking to us this morning, Congressman Issa. I want to say I at least appreciate what you do with the Philippine Alliance, so thank you. My question is that we're not doing enough. EDCA and Maritime Cooperation Assistance seems to not have any role in deterring China in promoting the rule of law that we want to see in the region. What more can the United States do behind the threshold of war with China to really deter them and to reinforce what we want to see in the region? Thanks.
Thank you. And look, I can give you some simple ones. They're somewhat aggressive, but I think they begin to make the point. One, obviously, when we put money into training and capability, we're making a statement that we're not going to be business as usual with China. And that's part of what we did in that large bill where, as you said, Taiwan was the focus, but Taiwan is just one of the aggressive acts that we need to push back on. The other one is an initiative that I think people haven't even begun to look at. China is currently buying, well, they currently have about 48 million barrels more in oil reserves than they had 14, 15 months ago. They're deliberately in a recession, they're buying excess oil. They're doing it in a swap program with 2 of their new allies, Iran and Russia. This aggressive buying of excess oil is in fact dangerous because it emboldens them. So one of the things with soft power that I expect that we will be doing in the coming months, and it'll probably take about 2 years, is getting Iran back down to the 300,000 barrels it was exporting from the 2 million barrels a day that they're exporting now, and similar reduction in Russia. That requires that we use our capability around the world to seize, send to port, and stop the flow of these so-called ghost ships. That's one of our responsibilities. Additionally, I want to do something I don't get to do enough of. I want to focus on something the administration just did. It just hit the news today. They made a decision with our partner and trade partner, Mexico, to say, we continue to have a duty-free relationship with Mexico, but when Mexico chooses to have items that are substantially made of aluminum or steel bought from China, there will be commensurate tariffs similar to what it would be if Chinese steel or aluminum came directly into the U.S. That is a smart piece of soft ability to tell China that there's a price to pay, and there will continue to be increasing prices to pay if they cannot join back to the rest of the world with the kind of rules that they've agreed to. And if we can do more of that, I believe that we really reduce the chances that we'll be in significant kinetic war with China or anyone else, because we really can reduce the export of those weapons from China. It just has to be in China's best interest to do so.
Thank you. We have time for one more quick question. Yes, sir. If you could approach the mic right here.
I'll try to be quicker on my answers. If two people walk up to the mic, I might be able to get two answers in.
Thank you very much. Robert Delaney with the South China Morning Post, Washington, D.C. Representative Issa, could you tell us what we could expect if former President Trump comes back into the White House in terms of the trilateral relationship that President Biden has built between the U.S., Japan, and the Philippines? How will you sort of, quote unquote, Trump-proof that? Thank you.
It's a great question. I just mentioned something that I agreed with President Biden on. Look, I was a big supporter of President Trump. I was in a Biden plus 13 district, and I stood on the stage with President Trump, and I won my election by 1,621 votes as a result. The fact is, I've been close to the president. I left Congress for 2 years and joined his administration and worked for free, actually, as it turned out, because I didn't get confirmed. I was on Air Force One with the president at the last possible day before I had to decide to come back to Congress, and I told him that I was going to land and I was going to go back to Congress, and he agreed. I was in Mar-a-Lago with the president a few weeks ago, and he still had a portrait that I'd given him, with him in it, behind him at his desk. I'm going to use every part of that relationship to get time with him and the Secretary of State, if he's president, to make sure that they fully understand that there are things I want back to the way President Trump did it. And I mentioned getting down to that 300,000 barrels or less coming out of Iran, because that's the right thing to do, and the president will be in favor of that. But I also want to make sure that nothing is thrown away that has been done properly or appropriately by this administration. This administration did a lot of unwinding of things simply because they were Trump initiatives. I want to make sure that we take the hybrid best of both. And in the nearly 4 years since President Trump left office, China's actions have become much more aggressive. China's activities have become much more in need of the focus of this administration. And obviously this president is going to inherit the problems in the Red Sea and the problems in Ukraine. So that's going to be one of my jobs, is to make sure that all three are focused on. Now, the good news is he no longer has to say NATO needs to pay their fair share. They can't spend money fast enough right now to get up to their 2%. But we need to take that to Asia, and we need to work with our partners. And so I'll be working primarily with the Secretary of State, but obviously taking advantage of the ability to go to the Oval and make sure that he and his national security team stay focused on those things which we can do with the partners. And I'm just going to reiterate something I did during my stand-up. What President Biden did by bringing together the president of the Philippines and the Prime Minister of Japan in a historic White House event, and an agreement that is the beginning of what I believe is going to be expanded throughout the region with like-minded partners, has to continue. We have to recognize that the best way to keep a peaceful South Asia and Asia period is to make sure that we all stand for the collective rules that we have agreed to, that are often ignored. They can no longer be ignored. They can't be ignored on the open ocean, and they can't be ignored even, as I said, as to Taiwan. But today's focus, I think, has to be appropriately on the Philippines, on the fact that the Philippines has developed a robust democracy. They are, in fact, in an economically growing country, one that we have investments in, and we need to make more investments in. And like Vietnam, they have the capability of being a great partner for the kinds of work that historically China was the first place to go for 20 years. We don't need to only go to China. There are other countries in Asia that want and have earned the right to have those relations. And so one of the other things I'm going to strongly suggest to the president is that we push much bigger trade missions through commerce and other areas, because the fact is companies go where our country leads. We led them to China for a long time, and I was part of that. We need to lead them back to partners who we can invest in, and the Philippines is certainly one of them. We all know that Taiwan is essential for our chip production, but there was a time when my chips were sourced out of the Philippines. Some of that has atrophied, including the IBM facilities, but it's not too late to make those kinds of investments again in a country with a democracy and a willingness to do so. And quite frankly, with a workforce often that goes outside the Philippines to find employment that would happily remain in the Philippines if the opportunity emerged. So I think I'm gotten the hook. I want to thank all of you. Please have me back. There's a few people I don't want you to invite back, but they've already left. Thank you.
I suspect they might not have been invited the first time.